I don't necessarily think that raising a lot of money means that, we're doomed to fail or doomed to arrogance or doomed to specifically making missteps. Like, that's not who we are. And it's just really important for us, even though we have a lot of resources, to still be very thoughtful about how we utilize those.
Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. Well, if there was one story to really nail in 2024, it has been infrastructure and a lot of excitement building around one of the most exciting layer ones to watch right now in the space. What even is the right way to talk about this project? I'm super excited to have the co-founder of Monad on Coinage with us, Keone Hon, to talk a little bit more about why there's so much excitement around Monad right now and why the project has attracted more than $225 million. Super exciting. Keone, thanks so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Zach. Great to be here.
It's exciting because I think, a lot of people right now are maybe want to learn more about kind of why so many projects right now, infrastructure projects that is, have been able to attract so much capital and the differentiating points between them. And I think for you guys right now, squarely, the attention is on Monad, not just in terms of the amount of money that you guys have raised this year, but also in terms of the excitement and why the project is needed. So we're going to get into all of that in a second. But first, maybe I just want to start with a little bit more on you because you come from Jump in the world of high frequency trading. I always think it's interesting to start with founders' kind of backgrounds and mentality because crypto can be anything, as we know. But if you started in high frequency trading, maybe that's kind of shaped the way you look at crypto. So why'd you get into this? Why start Monad? And how do you kind of see it shaping up as you guys continue to grow what you're building?
Yeah, for sure. Prior to Monad, I worked in the high frequency trading space as a quant for about 10 years. Started my career at a company called GetGo, which was an early pioneer in the HFT space, and then spent about 2 years there before joining Jump Trading in 2013. And, they're both great companies. I learned a ton about being really rigorous about data and building really performant systems over the course of my time at Jump from 2013 until 2022. The trading system that my team and I built really evolved a ton to be increasingly more performant and also increasingly more sophisticated in terms of the accuracy of predictions coming from utilizing more and more advanced machine learning techniques. So similar to how over the, I guess, the 2010s and now 2020s, we've seen the advance of ML, and now everyone understands the power of ML. There was kind of a similar shift that was happening within our trading team at Jump Trading. So I spent about 8 years on the HFT side in Jump, just trading in the traditional markets, and then ended up joining Jump Crypto in mid 2021. Mostly worked on Solana DeFi for about 6 months, along with the rest of my former team that was previously doing HFT, all immersed within this broader Jump Crypto organization. And then after about 6 months, ended up leaving Jump and starting Monad at the beginning of 2022, along with two other co-founders. And the vision for Monad has really always been pretty consistent. It's that the EVM is incredibly powerful. It's really the common standard upon which so many libraries are built, so many applications are built, so much applied cryptography research is being done. But the EVM itself is still, has a ton of areas of improvement, from the actual database in which the state is stored to the execution of transactions, which currently in existing EVMs is serial or one by one. As well as other things like the actual consensus mechanism and the way that the consensus and execution systems interact with each other. So Monad is really a from the ground up rebuild of Ethereum to have the same shape as Ethereum so that any applications can be redeployed without any changes, and all third-party infrastructure can interact with Monad in the same way that it would with Ethereum, but then with almost 1,000x the throughput. So going from 10 transactions per second to 10,000 transactions per second by applying some of the learnings from HFT and other experiences that our team has had to build a really modern pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you come from the high frequency trading camp, obviously I feel like you're going to be looking more at transaction speed, throughput, and bandwidth, everything that kind of can even handle some of the things. And that's obviously kind of where, Solana's push and why I assume Jump Crypto is super interested in the Solana space. But I feel like, there are some people who don't always look at crypto the same way, that it doesn't need to be all about speed. Could be about other things. Is it fair to maybe say that you guys are somewhat trying to do what Solana's been able to do well, but as you say, kind of maintain the shape of Ethereum, and kind of how do you look at the kind of big picture narrative building around Monad? Because when we had Anatoly on the show not too long ago, he was talking about this comparison of like 1,000 chickens pulling a cart versus like some fewer very fast horses, which would be the Solana example and metaphor. So, I mean, how do you look at that blend? I know you're kind of looking at people who are existing in the Solana ecosystem. What's the right way to kind of, in a sentence, explain taking the best of both worlds?
Mm. Yeah, he kind of went in the duck-sized horse, 1,000 duck-sized horses versus one horse-sized duck, and a thing, but with some warping there, which is interesting. Yeah, I think that there's, a couple of years ago there was this, there was so much discussion about the blockchain trilemma, quote unquote, and I think for some people it was cited as almost like gospel, like, okay, so the trilemma is between decentralization, performance, and security, and people kind of had this notion that if you were if the system was more performant, then it was inherently less decentralized, and that's perhaps true if one is only tweaking parameters, but the goal is really to come up with new software architecture so that we can get the best of both worlds. Like get the same amount of decentralization but more performance, or the same amount of performance but more decentralization. And that's really been the thesis of Monad, is introducing new software architectural improvements. There are four major ones which we could talk about if you're interested, but four different improvements as well as a lot of smaller improvements that, when stacked together, deliver significant performance improvements while still preserving a very high degree of decentralization. So in particular with Monad, the design from day one has been to use commodity hardware. So Monad does not rely on throwing a huge amount of hardware at the problem of building a blockchain, whereas some other networks might be more willing to raise the RAM requirements or the bandwidth requirements substantially, which then has a downstream effect on decentralization. And we do not subscribe to the philosophy that that's what we should be doing, because at the end of the day, we're all here because we care about decentralization. We have to preserve a very high degree of decentralization.
Yeah, no, I think we can get into some of those technical components in a second, because that's where I think it's always helpful to look at even the newer entrants, right? We got to start with Solana and Ethereum, and then get into, I think, other projects similar to yours that are now trying to solve that through parallelization engines and the idea of digging into that. But I don't want to lose our non-technical audience just yet, Keone. So we got to smooth into it. We got to ease into it. And one of the big questions, I think, just kind of setting the market size right now, when we look at what's been happening with fragmentation within the EVM/Ethereum space with all the layer 2s that have been built up. I'm curious just to kind of get your take on whether or not that's now somewhat harming the left side of the equation, if you want to call it that, in this mix between Ethereum and Solana, where it becomes somewhat less attractive or lucrative, or perhaps maybe some red flags get thrown up when you have so many projects that are seeking to scale Ethereum, that maybe some people get nervous and say, is this even a project that's going to be able to carry over that community anymore? Or is it maybe perhaps we've been hearing the term vampire tax being thrown around? Texas, I'm just looking at the market cap right now of Ethereum on my screen, because it's come down somewhat from the peak. And a lot of people are saying that, look, this is the beginning of the end, if you think about it that way. How do you look at, I guess, some of the waning interest in scaling Ethereum when so many people are trying to do it?
Right. Well, without commenting on the price at all or anything like that, I mean, I always focus on the technology. I think that if you just kind of like think about things, maybe using some amount of common sense and what you think the world will look like in the future. There are some trends that are starting to play out that I think our team kind of believed might happen when Monad started over 2 years ago. And those are related to just the fact that when it's really easy to launch a new layer two by forking the OP stack, then there's just going to be a huge proliferation of layer twos that are all going to be struggling to differentiate from one another because there's not really a technological differentiation at all. It's all about a go to market differentiation. And, this layer two is for this particular asset class and this one's for this other one. And it just becomes, quite confusing. For Monad, for our team, our focus has always been on technology and trying to introduce completely new technology, which then ultimately will hopefully push the space forward. We want to see this technology, some of these different improvements ultimately get incorporated into Ethereum as well. I think of Monad as a vanguard environment for Ethereum. So, I think that there's just certain trends when you're asking about like the recent discourse about layer twos and the relationship to the layer one. I think that there are certain temptations that certain layer two project operators may be ultimately tempted to go down the path of, and one of them is not using Ethereum for data availability. So we see that with different alt DA layers that are popping up that are cheaper, that are undercutting Ethereum's cost, basically. And when the discourse about layer two started, like many years ago, the assumption was always that the layer twos would be using Ethereum for DA and therefore would be, consuming a service of Ethereum that is contributing, fee flow back to Ethereum. And now that that's getting undercut, there's understandably some concern from the community. A second kind of I don't know what you call it, like Maginot line, or a second consideration is using the roll up token as the gas token on that layer two. So far, layer twos haven't really done that, but more and more we'll probably see that, and so then there will be another round of discourse within the community about like, is this a bridge too far? Like, is this and yeah, basically, there's just going to be a lot of continued discussion about that, and I don't know. I just think that that's kind of inevitable. Like, you could predict that if you just think about it. But for our team, we just want to focus on core architecture improvements, which then we can contribute back to Ethereum while proving them out within Monad, this Vanguard environment, and just help the Ethereum layer one to scale further.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting thing to watch play out. I mean, I think a lot of people were also interested in whether or not Base, one of the leading layer twos as well, would kind of launch their own token. They kind of said, "No, we wouldn't," and then they said maybe, and then they said, "No, we won't." So it's like people have watched that play out. I am curious kind of where you stand on whether or not there is a right route to go there, or even if Monad is kind of looked at as, it's the best shot you got if you want to kind of deliver on the technical components there, because as I said, there is some competition in other ways, in other projects, whether it's Sui, Aptos, you can look at Move VM. We just chatted with Movement not too long ago, and the idea of parallelization as well. So I guess now we can get into maybe some of the distinction between what you guys are doing and what other projects, I would throw Say into that mix maybe too, to kind of dig into what the real, I guess, selling case is for Monad versus the other projects. And again, I guess maybe if you want to weave it into why this is better for the Ethereum hardos out there, there's something to touch on there too.
Sure. A couple of things to point out. Monad is delivering the best of both worlds for users by delivering performance and decentralization. And Monad is delivering the best of both worlds for developers by offering performance plus portability. So just to touch on those kind of three different variables, performance is kind of like the obvious one to understand. So Monad is offering over 10,000 transactions per second of throughput. aka a billion gas per second, um, which is a more precise term. And that's possible through a series of different optimizations. I'll mention them really briefly. Um, the first one is MonadDB, which is a really performant database for storing Ethereum Merkle tree data natively on disk, offering parallel access to the database, which is really important for the stacks above. The second improvement is optimistic parallel execution. So Monad is offering parallel execution of transactions rather than serial, which is really important because we all know that our computers have many processors, they have many threads, they do many things in parallel. So it's crazy that Ethereum and other EVM compatible blockchains are all doing the work serially. Monad is parallelizing that through an optimistic approach. The third improvement is asynchronous execution, where consensus and execution are decoupled into separate swim lanes. For various technical reasons, this massively raises the budget for execution. I could talk about that more later, but TLDR, this is a massive improvement for execution throughput, and we're seeing other blockchains start to talk about adopting this concept as well. And then lastly, the fourth and final major improvement is Monad BFT, which is a really performant consensus mechanism that has linear communication complexity so that the network can scale to many more nodes without getting clogged up the way that most quadratic communication complexity algorithms run into.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just a way for consensus to kind of keep up with this really performant execution.
Yeah, it seems like, I mean, thank you for walking through all those. And it does seem like there are a lot of different routes that some of these projects are going to tackle some pretty brilliant solutions to the problem. And I think maybe now's a good time to shift into community, or maybe kind of, I guess, expand on your answer there in terms of differentiation, because I feel like for years, really honestly, for years, we've been talking about, hey, there might be too many projects out here in crypto, and we don't need this many. As a founder, I'm kind of curious where you come on that, because obviously it doesn't matter. You know, you're just doing your own thing. You're swimming in your own lane. So as long as you're delivering on growing, A, the community, B, kind of use cases for the technology you're building out. But that's a very hard thing to do in a decentralized way. I mean, how have you kind of looked at, hey, look, if Monad's going to succeed, we can't do what everybody else is doing. Maybe we can try and do something technologically different. But can't forget the community piece either. I heard you say on a podcast that the only successful path to marketing in crypto is community building. So kind of how have you looked at doing both in growing what y'all are getting up to?
Right. Yeah, I'm just super grateful to the Monad community for being incredible evangelists for the technology that we're building here in Monad Labs. At the end of the day, community is everything in crypto because if you think about the growth of every crypto project that's come before, whether that's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Dogecoin or what have you, what's really been common to each project has been incredible community members that have a shared vision and contribute a lot to helping each other and defining the vision for the project, defining the heart and soul for the project, and actually serving as the white blood cells for defending against bad actors in the space. And we see that a lot now. And people talk about ETH maxis or BTC maxis or what have you in a negative light. But at the end of the day, that is literally the community that is trying to uphold the principles that everyone has their own view on what the exact values of the community are, which is also very cool. So I think it's just very central to the decentralization of any crypto project, and just having stakeholders who are very opinionated and care a lot and help define that. Anyway, that's like what every successful crypto project in the past has had in common. And so with respect to Monad being a much earlier stage project, we're just incredibly blessed to have super, super strong community members who have built the community into what it is through incredible art, ton of creativity. There are a lot of folks in the community who are just passionate about different aspects of crypto and self-organize. We have the Quantico group, which is just like a fun group of people that basically you're creating educational content for how to go about in the crypto space as just a crypto fan. We have the Monad Run Club, which is originally tried to run 10,000 kilometers. It was a Strava group, and very quickly hit that, and now is trying to run the length of the circumference of the globe. We have Monlingo, which is a Duolingo effort to learn a new language, because we have a lot of community members from different regions, and they're trying to learn each other's languages. So I think it's, and many more initiatives as well,
Yeah.
including a ton of art and creation of so many just fun mascots, and deepening of the lore. And all of this is just driven by individuals who um, are getting a lot out of being part of the community as well, through job opportunities or leadership opportunities or an audience. But we're seeing in real time this community form. And now for the broader crypto community, Monad is really seen as a stellar example of how to build a great community, or how the
Yeah.
community builds a great community, basically.
Well, I think it has been interesting because, I've been covering crypto for a while now, basically since 2018. And, some of these narratives have been flipped on their head. So I would be curious to ask you, as kind of one of the projects that's raised the most VC money this year, is before it was kind of like a award. It was like a patch of honor to wear around and be like, we've been dubbed the winners in this space, and look at how much we have at our war chest. So like, we can't mess this up. And if you look at the performance of a lot of projects that have raised a lot of VC money, and kind of the playbook of kind of raise a lot of money, grow something, and then token unlocks crush the price, you can look at a lot of examples, and I think growing angst, honestly, in this space for projects that have gone down that path. So I wonder if it's fair to say even that like what has become, or what was once a patch of honor, has now kind of become a warning sign, and whether or not you see any of that pressure when you and the team are kind of discussing, all right, how do we want to do this? Because as you said, the playbook's there for growing community. You get a lot of people who are believers in your project, but also in crypto, it's a little bit of number go up. Nothing wrong with that, as a member myself. But I mean, when you look at that, is there maybe live by the sword, die by the sword when it comes to how Monad might think about, tokenomics, what all of that looks like, to get back to your earlier point, in all the various interest groups that you kind of have to navigate? I mean, what is the right way to do that when so many projects have done it wrong?
Well, I think all things equal, it's always better to have more resources. So I don't necessarily think that raising a lot of money means that we're doomed to fail, or doomed to arrogance, or doomed to um, yeah, like specifically making missteps. But I mean, there's probably a good amount of just like hubris that could potentially set in. And for our team, we're just very, like, that's not who we are. And it's just really important for us, even though we have a lot of resources, to still be very thoughtful about how we utilize those. And that could manifest in the form of like not throwing massive parties at conferences, or just being thoughtful about how we grow our team. And um, not hiring like people who are not crypto native, who are going to come in and maybe have a big resume, but like don't get the ethos of crypto at all.
Yeah.
So basically, not like making those mistakes that maybe other projects have in the past. But yeah, I mean, I think that our team is very privileged in a lot of ways to have the support of an incredible community, and to have so many resources, and also to be a very strong team. So yeah, we feel like there's no excuse, like there's no reason to not produce an incredible product and help push the space forward
Yeah.
substantially. But we shouldn't take that for granted either.
Well, it's just kind of interesting because we've had a few different founders on talking about kind of the routes to take. Some of them saying that, look, if the playbook's not broken, don't change it. When we had Movement on, they were talking about how Anatoly and Solana has done so well. They launched a phone. Now Movement's working on a phone. You got Evan from Sui talking about, gaming's a huge thing. Aptos also chasing gaming, and now Sui's rolling out their gaming device. So I'm just kind of curious if you look at things similarly. We're like, okay, there is a playbook that's worked. We can follow that playbook. And if that's the case, kind of, are there projects that you might seek to emulate just as they have? What's kind of like your thinking around what's to come from Monad, if it's going to be similar or different kind of on the roadmap?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong stance on this. So with any community building efforts that we've done, it's very much been inventing a playbook from scratch. So, in 2022 when we started, I think the conventional wisdom was hire like these external marketing agencies. Um, like there's certain the questing platforms are really popular.
Mm-hmm.
So Galaxy or Layer 3, run a quest and then it'll get a whole bunch of likes on Twitter, and it'll amplify like any tweet that you get out, and you'll get a lot more Twitter followers. That was kind of the conventional wisdom, or in the very least, it was what we saw a ton of projects doing, um, because that's like kind of the like fastest way to like affect the KPIs. And we always rejected that. We always felt that it was better to just reason from first principles and just do the right thing. And for us, from a community building perspective, that meant just trying to foster community that is actually enjoyable to be in, that actually delivers value to the members of the community, that actually delivers. And then, of course, like you have to ask, well, what value could we actually deliver to community members as a pre-mainnet project? And it turned out the answer is friendships, and being a place where during the bear market, like a ton of people who are kind of like doom scrolling Twitter and a little bit sad, like come together and actually make a ton of friends and commiserate and gain skills, and then over time that's evolved into something incredibly powerful. So with respect to every other aspect, we will take the same approach of not just trying to copy a playbook, but reasoning what actually makes sense for the actual, catalyzing the growth of the crypto space. So
Yeah.
in the context of like, will Monad have a phone? I'm not sure. Perhaps. Like, I do think directionally it makes sense that, like I spend a lot of time on my phone. It's like way more convenient a lot of times than using a computer. Like if I'm in a cab or on the subway or in bed, whatever. Like, so there's a lot of reasons why it would actually be very, very important for the mobile experience for decentralized apps on Monad or just in general to be very good. So
Yeah.
if that translates to like, yes, we should work on a phone, then we will do it when the time is right. But it wouldn't be just because other projects did that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting just from like kind of a perspective, and to hear the ideas as to why, if you can't really build decentralized apps, if everything's going through the app store, or the idea of kind of censorship and what could matter there. I get it. It makes sense. Hardware might be necessary, or honestly, just kind of like the flow and stack to make things easier for non-crypto natives to kind of on ramp. So I do get it. But to kind of build off what you said there in terms of KPIs, it seems like friendships would be a very hard thing to track, or certainly see on chain. I do wonder every time we have a founder on to talk about their project, kind of what they focus on for key metrics. And obviously with you guys kind of still in the earlier stages, it's a little bit harder for everyone on the outside to track. I'm curious if there are any things that you've seen along the kind of early build out stages that you would want to bring attention to, because for those that have already launched and have mainnets running out there, it's a little bit more fun to talk to them about, hey, is it TVL? Is it transactions per second once it's launched? But I do wonder, just in terms of your thinking, Keone, like kind of early thinking around, there are a lot of projects who are kind of trying to build off of Bitcoin now, just because so much money is locked there that, okay, it's a no-brainer. And to your point on community, a lot of projects have kind of built up around Ethereum because, okay, there's an existing community there to leverage. I'm curious kind of how you're tracking some of this early build out, what metrics you pay attention to, and I guess the idea of whether or not one is better than the other.
Yeah, I think maybe to talk about the Bitcoin L2 thing for a second. I think that's right. That's kind of one of the things that's happened this year is people see, well, Bitcoin as an asset class is a massive, the FDV of Bitcoin is massive. So if you could even capture like 0.1% of that and put that into TVL, like that would be a big number. And then, when people see big TVL, then that gives some momentum from a fundraising perspective or from a user engagement perspective. And I really feel like that's very, very backward, because it doesn't, like, then a lot of people or a lot of different projects are all going to do that. And if there's not like actual fundamental differentiation from a offering something new, offering something more powerful, then it doesn't really make sense. So yeah, I always want to just start from the end user and the utility that they're getting. um, I think that if we're talking about specific metrics, I think TVL is you know it's like the worst metric, second worst metric, where the worst metric is no metric, kind of thing. And then the better thing would be to try to measure user activity, but specifically to measure user utility. And I think the best proxy for user utility would be fees paid. Um, Perhaps like, if there are incentives involved, then that can confuse things as well. But looking at some measure of like, open up the economics textbook basically and say, the user must be getting this much utility if they're willing to pay this much in fees, and there's still some unknown consumer surplus that is the delta between the two. And the goal of any system should be, or any system designer should be, to like ultimately deliver the most end value to end users. So I would really tend to focus, as a first order factor, on the utility that the end user is getting.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think some of the better ways that I've seen people track all that is tied back to fees in terms of where network utility is. And other games exist. Let's not kid ourselves either that there are a lot of metrics that are played in this game to kind of throw people off the scent of kind of where growth's at. And so I think it's very tricky, but also very important for people to hear kind of where your head's at least as far as our
Right.
members here at Coinage are concerned, because sometimes founders don't all agree on
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah, I think it's just good to point out that, for example, Ethereum as a network generates about $3 billion per year in fees that are paid, and there's a little bit of complexity around how some of the fee gets burned, which then contributes to deflation, and some of it goes to stakers, which, anyway, there's like, but the top line thing is like, that was the amount of fees that were paid. That's actually the thing that is sort of the most important thing to focus on.
I've got two more questions for you. One is somewhat existential, but it is tied back to what you just said. And then the other one's just kind of what to look ahead to, because a lot of our viewers always want to kind of be there to participate in all this stuff. So just kind of getting to what's next at Monad. But on the point you just made, I think, I don't know, it's been interesting to watch kind of somewhat of this become circular in the way of, okay, we saw NFTs launch because people needed to do stuff with these chains. And we saw how that all played out. Then we saw meme coins kind of explode on the scene, and speculation was speculation. It's just kind of seems like kind of building the next use case to support why anyone would want to use crypto. And it's kind of just constantly the next thing, in a way that I think, if you think about it, even seeing NFTs now merge back to the Bitcoin world was kind of like, okay, well, people are actually using the thing to support miners. We need to have more transactions in this ecosystem. Otherwise, we're kind of screwed. Just kind of like an ongoing, admittedly, I don't think it's actually a Ponzi. But to everyone who's always outside the bubble, they always think crypto's a Ponzi. And I'm curious if, like, as you see kind of more use cases being built, if you want to take the pessimistic stance, which a lot of people do, they always scream Ponzi. If you want to take the optimistic stance, which is, hey, look, we're building the tech and then we're going to build things you can do with it. Sounds like the things you can do with it, as you would define it, is a lot to do with trading. But I'm just kind of curious how you always defend this industry to people whenever maybe potentially say like, oh, Keone went from MIT into crypto. I get it all the time. What do you say to people who are kind of watching everything play out?
Right. I think that there's a couple of areas where there is clear product market fit for crypto. Payments and settlements is really the top one. If you look at the amount of um, payments volume, whether it's remittances or just small payments between different people within a country, it's actually quite large. So that's one clear area. And then more generally, settlement, where we can get really fast settlement on a blockchain as opposed to having to wait for different centralized parties to communicate with each other, ping back and forth before ultimately transferring an asset. Um, to your point about NFTs kind of spiking in usage and then crashing, or now meme coins, I kind of see those things as um, almost like bonuses for the crypto adoption case that were not necessarily expected or easy to predict, and therefore are, like a thing that could help adoption a little bit, but definitely aren't the single thing that is needed in order to drive adoption. I think a good analogy would be, if you were Uber and then, the GM of Uber was like looking at the revenue of Uber like in a particular city, and then all of a sudden there's like, a crypto conference that shows up there, and then during that weekend the revenue of Uber like spikes a lot, but then crashes after the conference is over. It's like, you're not going to be able to predict everything that happens. Sometimes there is luck involved, and sometimes the luck like is temporary and then dissipates. But the arc should still be, really about the fundamental utility that helps to improve everyday lives of everyday people. And then sometimes there is just like this extra exogenous burst that could drive more people to get more eyeballs on the space and set up a MetaMask wallet or set up a Phantom wallet, or like, start getting involved, which then can help drive adoption, but is not in and of itself like the thing that is the unique thing that crypto enables.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting to see kind of what sometimes the incentive structures that are built kind of focusing on transactions for transactions sake, and certainly if you're kind of looking at some of those metrics, that is what you would optimize for. But sometimes those could go in some bad directions if the thing that you're trading doesn't really have any inherent value. So I think it's always kind of from where we sit as a DAO co-op where NFTs are memberships into co-owning what we're building. I think it's always interesting because we don't see a lot of volume, but we do see people holding our memberships a lot, which is very, I think, antithetical to some of the other things that have been built in the past. But to wrap up here, my friend, just kind of want to end on what people should be looking forward to in terms of the roadmap. I know you guys are cooking on a lot of things. It seems like there's a lot of projects in your guys' camp that have kind of held out on either A, launching a token, or kind of getting to mainnet launch. Mostly, I would say maybe because of the market that we find ourselves in, but kind of curious what the roadmap looks like. What should people know about what's next to come from Monet?
Yeah, the end of this year and early next year are going to be really exciting for um, our team and the Monad community and all Monad fans. Um, we're in the process of opening up a public testnet in the coming months. Um, and then just more generally, there's a ton of ambitious builders that I interact with, that or other members of our team are interacting with, that are building ambitious apps that can ultimately cross the chasm, we think, to mainstream adoption. So I agreed with you on the point about um, just the momentum of the ecosystem. And I think a lot of that is actually driven by the power of the community as well, because builders see that by engaging with the Monad community and building in the Monad ecosystem, they get a huge burst of support and almost like moral support, which I think does wonders in terms of helping to validate some of the theses, test out the app, and give them some momentum for whatever they need to do next.
As we always do, I like ending. I lied. One more question. Bold predictions from Keone Hon. It doesn't need to be about Monad. Oftentimes, our founders do end on one of the bold predictions that they have for their own projects, but it could be that. Could be the crypto space in general. There's only a few months left in 2024. What's your big bold prediction for crypto to wrap up the year?
I think that the really strong teams, the whether they're application builders or layer one builders or something else, like the strong teams are going to continue to grind. And um, I almost think of it like a car that's stuck in the mud, where you just have to like turn the wheels harder, like get a little bit more torque, and we're going to see some of these teams just start to get more and more adoption, and specifically more and more real world adoption, like of non-crypto natives. We're seeing better UX, better onboarding flows, better abstraction of gas and some other like frictions that normal people have, better mobile experiences. So yeah, my prediction is really that once you kind of dive into the crypto rabbit hole, you never really come out, which is a very good feature to have, because it means over time, like the mind share of crypto and acceptance of crypto as settlement rails is really up and to the right.
It does seem that way. And we've had a lot of guests come on recently. It's an election year. A lot of guests saying that look at how much is being talked about there. Even though it might not be on the debate stage, certainly everywhere else in politics, it's happening. Keone Hon, the co-founder of Monad. Appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you so much for taking the time. Got to have you back. Keep us posted on what you guys are rolling out next.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.